tell you about going to school. I always waited for the bus. I rode the school bus to Alberta, and I'd wait on the south side of the little brick building, you know, out of the wind and everything. Couldn't get out of the rain. I'd have to just stand up under the eave of the building to stay out of the rain. But I'd ride the bus to and from St. Benedict. Well, when you're in grammar school, you don't always have the best of judgment. So I decided one day I was just going to go home with John Kane. John was one of my classmates there at St. Benedict. He lived in Alberta. So I went home with John, but I didn't tell my mom or dad or anybody I was going to do that. So I don't know, I can't imagine what must have happened, but anyhow, my mom was pretty adamant that I wasn't to ever do anything like that again. Then when we reached the 8th grade, we all went from St. Benedict to Foley. And that was a whole new deal. I mean, a lot more people. Foley was, we had Foley High School, Fairhope High School, Robertsdale High School, and Bay Minette High School. And that was it. There wasn't all these other schools. But I think I had 130 people in my graduating class, but we were a real close group. I tell people that, you know, these school shootings today, if somebody had come into Foley High School with a pistol and fired one shot, there would probably been 50 kids that ran out to the parking lot, grabbed a shotgun out of the back of their pickup truck and ran back into the school to stop that nonsense. And we were just like that. We all had shotguns in the back of our truck. Different day and age, but we sure had some cute young girls and big old healthy athletes. We were a good group. We all loved each other. Let me tell you about the television. For a long time, we didn't have a television. I can remember getting one, and it sat in the corner of the living room, and outside we had an antenna on a pole, and a little wire ran from the TV out through the window to the antenna. And we had channel 3, channel 5, channel 10. That's all we could pick up. Well, channel 3's in Pensacola, and 5 and 10 were in Mobile. And if we wanted to go from 5 and 10 to 3, I'd have to get up, go outside. My mom would put the TV on channel 3, and I had to twist that antenna outside, raining or dry or whatever. I'd twist that antenna until it pointed toward Pensacola. I heard rumors that were people that had electrically controlled mechanism to turn their antennas, and I remember always thinking, I sure hope I get rich enough to have an electric control for my TV antenna. We didn't have it. We didn't have any kind of a cable or anything like that. Saturday mornings, of course, was all cartoons. Channel 3 had a wrestling show. Wrestling was a pretty big deal back in the day when I was growing up. And I would watch them sitting on a couch in there, and they had pillows. And I'd get so excited, I'd pull pillows up under me, and I'd be standing on a stack of pillows, sitting on a stack of pillows that high, and my grandmother laughing at me. And I remember that about watching TV. It was pretty exciting. We said Wrestling 5, Wrestling Live on Channel 5, Wrestling Fixed on Channel 6. Let me tell you about the railroad. The L&N Railroad, I don't know how it got to Bay Minette, but it was from Bay Minette to Foley, and the tracks went a little bit south of Foley, well, down to where the VFW is. I don't know if I think the little tank is still sitting down there. But it too went at a snail pace because the tracks just did like that. And it'd come by here at maybe 25, 30 miles an hour, just rocking down the track, and he would blow the horn at the grade crossing at 24, and then he'd blow the horn up in the curve up north of here, where the street crossed the track. The only time they had a steam locomotive was for some celebrations in Foley, I can't remember the name, but they had a name for that steam train. But all the other trains were big diesels, big diesel engines. They didn't pull many cars because there wasn't any reason to get a lot of cars down here in Foley, except during potato season when they were harvesting potatoes, and they had a turnaround south of Foley, where they would go past the turnaround, back into it. It was a Y, and then come back out. He'd go in, headed south, back in, and then come out headed north. And the train ran twice a day. It came down in the morning, it went north in the morning and came down in the afternoon. So. And one more thing about the train, the boxcars had hatches at each end of the boxcar that opened up and had a compartment. And in order to ship potatoes or gladiolus or anything that needed to be cool, they would come to the ice house in Foley that made ice, and they would come up with blocks of ice, and they had a rig set up to take those blocks up and dump them into those compartments at the end of each boxcar. Fill them with ice, and then leave the hatches open just a little so air would circulate through, and that's how they kept the boxcars cool to get potatoes to Chicago or wherever. Had to harvest those potatoes early in the year because, boy, they'd go to mush in no time if it got 80 to 90 degrees, something like that. Well, let me tell you about my career. For some reason, I always wanted to be an architect. My hero was Frank Lloyd Wright. Well, I apparently was clever enough on these standardized exams to guess the right answers. So I made some real good scores on these standard tests and got an academic scholarship to Tulane University, to the School of Architecture. Well, I went down there, and after my freshman year, I realized I wasn't going to fit in as an architect. So I wound up transferring to the School of Engineering, and then I transferred from Tulane to the University of Alabama. I got my civil engineering degree at the University of Alabama, and I went to work for a company called David Volkert and Associates in Mobile. And I wound up working there for 40 years. And when I first started working there, I decided energetic and work wasn't enough, so I I went to school at University of South Alabama and got me an MBA and wound up, I was a good enough, what happens in engineering, if you're a real good engineer, you get promoted until you're not doing any engineering anymore, you're doing marketing and administration. And I wound up, like I said, I was there for 40 years and I retired in 2007 as the senior vice president with Volkert & Associates, and only job I ever had in my adult life. So it's been very, very good to me. First few years I was working at Volkert, I lived in Mobile. I rented a house to start with and then bought a little house, and then I wanted to move back to Baldwin County. So I bought a house in Bell Forest, which is a little community outside just east of Daphne. But when I first got my job at Volkert, I lived at Gulf Shores and drove from Gulf Shores to Mobile 5 days a week. A long drive. Because where I worked, the office I worked in was out on Moffett Road on the west side of Mobile. But I thoroughly enjoyed, the people that I worked with at Volkert were just, we're still family. We get together once a month at a lunch reunion, and of course we're thinning out rapidly. But I'll still make every reunion lunch, and we talk about old times. We did some good work too. We did some real good work. Let me tell you about the commute from Foley, well, from Gulf Shores to Mobile back in the day. Highway 59 was 2-lane, but there wasn't a lot of traffic. And I had a Chevelle. It was a 1965 Chevelle with a high horsepower V8. I could eat up the highway. Wasn't many people I couldn't pass. And I would leave Gulf Shores and go up and hit Highway 90 at Malbus and turn and go down the hill to the causeway. And when I first started driving back and forth, the causeway was 2 lanes, and then they added that south lane in there. And either take the Bankhead Tunnel or Cochran Bridge, the old lift bridge across the river up there. And you had to have give yourself a little over an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes to get to work. I didn't do that very long and decided I needed to start living in Mobile. So that's when I rented a house over there. Well, I paid off some debts and rented a house over there. Let me tell you about Gulf Shores back when I was growing up. Gulf Shores had a dead-end street. Highway 59 just dead-ended at the beach. And you had the West Beach Boulevard, which went down to the Little Lagoon Pass. And then East Beach Boulevard that went down to the State Park, Lake Shelby State Park. And we used to, before I was driving, we'd go down every Saturday to Lake Shelby and have a family cookout. I had 2 uncles that lived in Foley at the time. And the whole family would gather to Lake Shelby and have a cookout. My cousin Billy was just a couple of years older than I was, and we'd spend the whole day in that lake. One day we'd been down to Lake Shelby. I'm sorry, it wasn't It was a Sunday drive with my grandmother. And we went the road by Lake Shelby, and there was a mama raccoon in the road and with two little raccoon babies. And my dad got out and got a potato sack out of the back of the trunk and scooped up the two babies, and the mama raccoon didn't like that. She attacked him. He hopped back in the car, and we headed back to Foley and gave one of the raccoons to Henry Carson that was in the mayor of Foley, and we kept the other raccoon. And he lived in the house with us, right here in this house. I remember him, he was just cuddly and everything, but he was a thief. And he would steal my grandmother's glasses for some reason. The house has an attic. He would take those glasses up into the attic, and he had a little nest up there. I say he, she, or he, I don't know. But he would always get my grandmother's glasses. My mother lost a child 3 or 4 years before I was born. And when she was pregnant with me, Dr. Sibley Holmes suggested that she have a cesarean birth. And he sent her to Providence Hospital in Mobile. And she had a cesarean birth. She was then placed into room 319 of Providence Hospital. I was born on June the 6th. She checked in Providence Hospital on June the 5th and checked out on June the 17th. And the total bill was $149.29. A bargain. Philomene Holmes was Dr. Holmes' wife and nurse, chief nurse, and she delivered a lot of kids. Dr. Holmes delivered a lot of kids in people's homes, but there were a lot born up above the drugstore in Foley in the Holmes Hospital, the first hospital in Baldwin County. And I think they have a reunion every year. I think it's coming up here on the 27th of May. They call them Holmes babies, all of them that were either born with Dr. Holmes and Philomene in attendance or in the hospital. When Dr. Holmes retired, everybody wondered, my God, the world's coming to an end. What are we going to do? And the new doctor came in, and everybody was, had one eye lifted. What's he going to be like? His name was Dr. Marvin Taylor. And he wound up being a god to the people here in Foley. And he married a local girl, gorgeous, June. I think her name was June Blackman. And Dr. Taylor just ingrained himself into Foley, became a part of Foley, and is an icon in this town now. And he had a place down on Bon Secours Bay, and I'd go down there once a week for lunch. He cooked lunch, and he and Johnny Shaw, who owned the John Deere dealership, and several other regulars played bridge, and they would play bridge, and other people, we would cook something down there. Good food, good companionship, just a part of old Foley that's now gone. Let me show you this. This is a sketch that was done of my grandmother's old 2-story house, which was at County Road 24 and 59. My grandmother and grandfather lived there, and my mother. And it was a big house, and they fixed it up so it had an upstairs that they could rent out. And after my grandfather died, my grandmother would rent out the upstairs of her house. And give her a little extra cash. Well, when my grandmother died, my mother rented the house to a chiropractor named Dr. McFadden. And he had quite a family. He lived there for years, rented the house, had his little chiropractor practice there. And he finally moved out. And the old house was beginning to show its age, and my mom didn't want to see it fall down, so she put it on a swap shop. Free house, you move it. And a young lady that worked for the telephone company got Mr. John Snook to help her. I think her name was Sandra Ivy. And they moved that big old two-story house from where it was up Highway 59 into Summerdale and back out to the west of Summerdale. I remember they had guys sitting on the roof with poles, because the power lines went across the highway, were hanging down when the house was in, but they lift them up and walk down the house and let them down the back. I mean, it took them a full day to get to Summerdale that way, but that's what they did. And I went out to see the house after they'd moved it, and went back a couple years later, and I just couldn't find out. I thought I was in the right place. Couldn't find it. Since then, I found out that it burned down not long after they moved it. I hated it. Quite an old house, so it's a big old thing. Back in those days, you had a living room, a dining room, a kitchen downstairs, and all the bedrooms were upstairs. And my grandmother didn't want to go upstairs, so he built a little downstairs bedroom addition on the big old house. But like I said, back then you'd go see you'd find you a mason, you'd find you a roofer and a framer. And I did the same thing. My wife and I built a house 5 years ago. And I did the same thing. I hired a framer, I hired a foundation guy, and acted as my own general contractor, the way things used to be done. So, and it gave me a lot more say in the house, how that house was built too. Let me tell you about my daughter. This is my mother and my daughter in the pecan orchard. Her name's Kim, and she grew up here in Foley, and she and her mother lived in this house for a while. She went out in Texas and had two sons, AJ and Cody. And she moved back to Foley not long ago. And I had a cousin that was living in my father's house, my grandfather's house. But she got dementia and had to go to a memory care facility. So I didn't want the house to sit empty, so my daughter and my grandson, one of my grandsons, moved into my grandfather's house. So it's kind of unique. My daughter's living in her great-grandfather's house, and my grandson is living in his great-great-grandfather's house. But my daughter bakes cookies and goes to the Saturday morning farmer's market and markets her cookies and everything. And it's good to have her back from Texas. I'm enjoying her. Well, let me tell you about our date nights and social life here in Foley. It all centered around the hangout at Gulf Shores. At the end of Highway 59, I don't know whose idea it was. On the east side of the dead end, there was a Quonset hut called the Little Casino. They had basically a beer joint. But on the right-hand side, there was a covered area called the Hangout. And it had a big old jukebox with tons of rock and roll music, like $0.25 a song. They made a fortune on that jukebox. So Friday night, you go to the drive-in movie. Friday night was date night. Saturday night, you went out with the group. Friday night, you go to a drive-in movie, go to the bowling alley, and then go down to the Windmill, which was a drive-in restaurant south of Foley. The old building's still there. I can't remember. I think it's an insurance company now. But Saturday night was out with the guys, and the girls went out with the girls. And our life on Saturday night went the bowling alley, to the Windmill, to the Hangout, back to the Windmill, to the bowling alley, to the Windmill, to the Hangout. All of us in our own cars, you know. That just up and down that highway. And of course, all of that was all 2-lane roads into Gulf Shores and the old swing bridge that used to be down there. And if a barge was coming, you may have a 45-minute wait where the bridge was open. If you were on the south side of the bridge, you have a 45-minute wait there with absolutely nothing. Swamp on both sides of the road. Couldn't turn around, couldn't back up, couldn't do anything. But part of life back then. And we enjoyed it. Let me tell you about the Hub Drive-In. It was just south of Robertsdale on the west side of Highway 59. And a good friend of mine's dad managed it, Ben Tisdale. And I forget now how much it was. It wasn't very much to go to the drive-in. You parked in rows, kind of like, it was a gradual semicircle. And then you put your speaker, you hang it on the window, roll the window up, and you'd always laugh when some couple would decide they wanted to leave right now, and they'd drive up. They'd crank up, drive off with the speaker still in the window, and they had the speaker cord went over to a pipe that was sitting on a car wheel with a tire on it. They'd drag that thing, stop, get out, unhook the speaker, head on out. But the drive-in had an exit. And when you went in, you had to pay your fee. But when you went out, there were these fingers that stuck up, and they They were angled toward the exit, so when you drove over them, they would just go down and you wouldn't hurt your tire. But if you tried to come in the exit, those fingers were sticking up and they just rip your tire to pieces. And I don't know, I bet I hadn't heard more than 3 people trying to get into that Hope Theater out of the exit. It's gone now, it's torn down. I forget, there's something big going in up there. I don't know what it is, being built. But we didn't go to Fairhope, or we didn't go to Robertsdale. We stayed in Foley. You stayed in your own little town. And we didn't like intruders at Gulf Shores either. Those guys from Pritchard, we weren't going to tolerate them. And we had several fights on the beach down there with guys from Pritchard. And back in those days, there were some big beach houses down there. The Holmes had a house, the Hopes had a house. They were big old rambling beach houses. You couldn't give property away at Gulf Shores because you couldn't raise anything. You know, it's just all sand, nothing would grow down there. But there was a guy named, anyhow, he was a realtor. Biggest little man in Gulf Shores. He was real short and round. And he had a little office there on Highway 59 just as you got to the end, right before you got down to the water. And he sold land in Gulf Shores for nothing. Just nothing. My parents bought a cottage. My mom always wanted a cottage on the water. And so they bought a cottage at Gulf Shores. And it was across the highway from the beach. This is after Gulf Shores had grown a little bit. And we go down there on weekends and we love that. But when Hurricane Frederick came through, all the news reports and everything just said, Gulf Shores is gone. So we couldn't wait to get down there, but sand had covered the road and everything. But finally, when we got down there was our little cottage standing proud, but right across the street there was a horseshoe-shaped condo. And you may have seen pictures of it, all the walls had fallen down, been blown down, and our cottage was right across the street from there. It was across the street from where they used to have sunrise services at Gulf Shores. On Sunday morning, there was a cross out there on the beach, and they would have sunrise service. I had a poker group. We would meet, drink beer and play poker at Gulf Shores on Saturday night. And many as a Sunday morning, I've waken up to car doors slamming for sunrise service, and I'd have to crawl out there on the front porch and get the beer cans off the railing. It's fun. And let me tell you about the farming industry in Baldwin County. It's dying and dying quickly. Because the land is so valuable that it just doesn't make sense to make $200,000 a year off of $9 million worth of property. It just doesn't make sense. And subdivisions are popping up everywhere and people moving in. Farmers' days are numbered in Baldwin County. I've kind of this corner that we're on here, and there's no telling how much this is worth. A lot more than what I'm using it for. But as long as I'm alive, it's going to stay just about like it is. I don't want to see it develop. I have too many memories tied up in this place. Back in 2007, I was with Volker working. Had a good job, making a good salary, and enjoying life. And when the bottom fell out of everything, I said, I need to buy land in Baldwin County. So I retired so I could get my hands on my retirement money. And I took all that money and invested it in land in Baldwin County. And wound up with about 300 acres of land. And it's the best thing I've ever done financially, by far. There's a guy that raises Super Bowl sod down in Magnolia Springs. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He raises the sod on a heavy plastic, and if you have a college game in the stadium in Miami on a Saturday night, pro game on a Sunday, he's there half a mile from the stadium with all these 18-wheelers loaded with sod. And after the college game clears out, he goes in, rips up the sod off the college field, and goes in and lays fresh sod with the markings for a pro game. And he's doing real well at that. I rented him 80 acres down there. We just signed a long-term lease a couple of years ago, something like 25-year lease on that land. Then Cleverton Farms, just down the road here, they're big sod raisers. And I got an 80-acre sod farm in Summerdale that I rent to them. Then I rent property to the Underwoods for row crop farming. I rent enough that I don't have to worry, but I don't want to see that land subdivided and developed.